Texas is staring at an impossible number, a forecast that has system operators in a state of quiet, controlled panic. 92,211 megawatts. That is the amount of electricity the state grid must deliver this summer to prevent a catastrophic statewide failure. If it fails, millions of people go dark in the middle of a lethal heat wave. The all-time record, set on a brutal afternoon in August 2023, was 85,508 megawatts. This new number is not just an increase, it is a new category of threat, and it's arriving right now. As of this morning, an unforgiving heat dome is parked over the state. In South Texas, the heat index is cracking 115 degrees. In Austin, Houston, and El Paso, the National Weather Service has issued excessive heat warnings that stretch for days, not hours. This isn't just summer, it is a siege. I want you to think about what a heat emergency feels like where you are. Is it a news headline, or is it something you can feel on your front porch? Let me know in the comments. We're about to show you why Texas is different. Now, a lot of people watch our videos, see the crisis unfolding, and forget to subscribe. This is a story you need to follow. The information we're about to lay out isn't being covered this way anywhere else. To make sure you get the next part of this developing story, you need to hit that button. It's that important. Let's begin. The impossible number, 92,211 megawatts, is not just about air conditioners. Everyone has an AC. That part is predictable. But there's a new variable in the equation. A demand so massive it has forced the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, to rip up its own rulebook just to survive the summer. They are hiding a backlog of 438,000 megawatts in connection requests. A wall of demand that is almost 5 times larger than the entire grid's projected peak for this summer. And 89% of it is coming from 2 places: AI data centers and cryptocurrency mines. These are not normal customers. A factory shuts down at night. Your home air conditioner cycles on and off. A data center consumes colossal amounts of power, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without interruption. It is a flat line of demand at the highest possible level. A completely new kind of stress on a grid already pushed to its absolute limit. So the real question isn't whether Texas can handle a hot summer. It's whether Texas can handle a hot summer while simultaneously plugging in an entire shadow grid of machines that never sleep. And what happens when the people in charge finally admit the answer is no? Texas has always operated on an island. Its power grid is famously, almost defiantly, isolated from the rest of the United States. 90% of the state's power is managed by ERCOT, a non-profit corporation that has no easy way to import electricity from neighboring states during an emergency. When a crisis hits, Texas must save itself. There is no cavalry coming. That isolation is a point of pride for some. For the engineers staring at the numbers in June 2026, it is a terrifying liability. The memory of Winter Storm Uri in 2021, when the grid collapsed in freezing temperatures and left millions without power for days, still haunts every decision. That was a winter failure. Now, the battle has shifted to the summer, and the enemy is heat. But the opponent isn't just the sun anymore. It's the titanic, unprecedented appetite of the digital economy. Until this month, ERCOT approved large connections to the grid on a first-come, first-served basis. A simple, linear process that worked for decades. It no longer works. The tsunami of requests from data centers threatened to create localized blackouts and destabilize entire regions of the grid. Connecting a single 1,000 megawatt data center can require years of infrastructure upgrades to transmission lines and substations. Now imagine hundreds of them all asking to connect at once. The system wasn't just strained, it broke. So in June 2026, ERCOT President and CEO Pablo Vegas stood before regulators and announced a fundamental change. The first-come, first-served system was dead. It was replaced with something called the batch zero process, a form of battlefield triage for the power grid. Instead of looking at projects one by one, ERCOT will now study them in massive groups, or batches. It's an attempt to see the whole picture, to understand how a cluster of data centers in West Texas might threaten the stability of power delivery in Dallas. Pablo Vegas called it an energy transformation unlike anything we have seen before. That is the language of a man trying to build a new ship while the old one is already sinking in a storm. Batch zero is not a solution. It is a desperate emergency measure. It is the grid operator admitting that the demand from a single industry has become so overwhelming, so existentially threatening, that the old rules of physics and economics no longer apply. They are rewriting the flight plan while the plane is in a nosedive. The heat itself is a silent, brutal force. In Corpus Christi, on the South Texas coast, the temperature reading on your phone doesn't tell the story. It is the heat index, the combination of air temperature and what meteorologists call tropical humidity, that creates the danger. This June, that number hit 115 degrees. At that level, the human body cannot effectively cool itself by sweating. Being outside for any extended period is not just uncomfortable, it is a medical emergency waiting to happen. Across Nueces County, in towns like Robstown, Banquete, Bishop, and Agua Dulce, officials have opened municipal cooling centers. Libraries, community halls, public buildings with functioning air conditioning become life rafts. Jim Reddick, the director of Austin's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, sees the same pattern. His agency activates a citywide alert system, Warn Central Texas, pleading with residents to stay indoors, to check on elderly neighbors, to recognize the signs of heat stroke. And those calls are coming. Captain Krista Stedman, the spokesperson for Austin Travis County EMS, becomes the public face of the crisis every summer. Her agency's data is the frontline indicator of how bad things really are. A spike in 911 calls for heat exhaustion, an increase in people found unconscious in homes without AC, a surge in responses to construction sites where workers have collapsed under the sun. Each call is a single point of data. Together, they form a portrait of a city under assault from its own climate. But here's the part that is almost never reported. The official numbers you hear about are wrong, dangerously wrong. In February 2026, a landmark study was published in the scientific journal GeoHealth by a team at Texas A&M University. It looked at the official number of heat-related deaths recorded by the Texas Department of State Health Services, or DSHs. In 2023, a year with one of the deadliest heat waves in state history, the DSHs officially counted 563 deaths from heat. The Texas A&M study found that the true number was likely 6 times higher. 6 times. For every one person whose death certificate officially says heat stroke, the study found that 5 other people died from conditions that were triggered or fatally worsened by the extreme heat. A heart attack on a 105-degree day. Respiratory failure in an apartment that never cooled below 85 degrees at night. Kidney failure from severe dehydration. These deaths are not counted as heat-related by most medical examiners, but they are deaths that would not have happened without the heat. Andrew Dessler, a climate scientist at Texas A&M and one of the study's authors, put it in stark terms. Official Texas records captured only about 1/6 of the statistically estimated heat deaths, he said. He believes policymakers are operating blind, making decisions about a crisis whose true scale is completely hidden from them. I think a lot of people are on the cusp of having an oh shit moment about extreme heat, Gessler said. It means, at best, changing how we live. At worst, it means suffering and death. Think about that. The official government statistics that are used to allocate resources, to declare emergencies, to justify policy changes, are capturing only a fraction of the real human cost. An entire iceberg of mortality is lurking just beneath the surface of the reported data. So when you hear about cooling centers opening, you are seeing a response to the visible tip of that iceberg. The thousands of other unseen victims represent a silent, systemic failure. Does it change how you think about a heat wave, knowing the numbers are off by that much? Let me know in the comments. The problem for ERCOT and the 29 million people who depend on it gets even worse when the sun goes down. For years, the most dangerous time for the Texas power grid was the late afternoon, around 3 or 4 p.m., when temperatures peaked and air conditioners across the state were running at full blast. That is no longer true. The new moment of maximum danger is between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. It's called the sunset squeeze. Texas has invested heavily in solar power. On a clear day, vast solar farms in West Texas generate thousands of megawatts of clean, cheap electricity. This solar generation helps meet that peak afternoon demand, providing a critical cushion for the grid. But every evening, that cushion vanishes. The sun sets, and in the space of about an hour, thousands of megawatts of solar power simply evaporate from the system. The problem is, the demand does not. At 8 p.m., temperatures are still brutally hot. Texans are returning home from work, turning on their lights, cooking dinner, and keeping their air conditioners cranked up. The demand stays relentlessly high, but a huge source of supply has just disappeared. The grid operators have to scramble to replace that lost solar power with electricity from natural gas plants, coal plants, and batteries. This is the moment of maximum stress, the tightest point of the day. The sunset squeeze is a daily, heart-stopping balancing act. Threading a needle every single evening, hoping that a major power plant doesn't unexpectedly trip offline or that demand doesn't surge even higher than forecast. It's a vulnerability created by the very solution, solar power, that was meant to help save the grid. And it leads to another invisible threat: tropical nights. In places like Houston, the danger isn't just the daytime peak. It's the fact that it never cools down. High humidity traps the heat, preventing overnight temperatures from dropping into a range where the human body can recover. A low of 82 degrees with 90% humidity is incredibly dangerous. It means homes without air conditioning, the physical structures themselves, never shed the heat they absorb during the day. People trying to sleep find no relief. Their bodies remain stressed, hour after hour. AC units that have been running all day get no break, pushing them closer to failure. Tropical nights are the silent killers of a heat wave, breaking down both human and mechanical systems through sheer, grinding attrition. As the grid strains and the bodies pile up, the crisis inevitably becomes political. On June 10, 2026, Governor Greg Abbott issued an aggressive directive. He ordered the Public Utility Commission of Texas, or PUCT, the state agency that regulates ERCOT, to create new rules ensuring that the massive infrastructure costs required by data centers are not passed on to residential ratepayers. It was a preemptive strike, an admission that the price tag for connecting this new industry was going to be astronomical, and that the political fallout from soaring electricity bills would be untenable. Data centers must operate in ways that reduce costs for residential electricity customers, the governor's statement read. He wants them to pay for their own transmission lines, their own substations, their own grid upgrades. The man in charge of implementing this is Thomas Gleason, the chairman of the PUCT. His job is to translate that political directive into enforceable, technical regulation. It is a collision of two Texas identities: the pro-business, regulation-light state that attracts industries like crypto and AI, and the populist demand to protect the average citizen from the consequences of that growth. The question is, can you have both? Can you invite an industry that requires a nation's worth of power to your isolated grid and somehow shield your population from the bill? Governor Abbott is betting that you can. The engineers at ERCOT are not so sure. The cost for upgrading the grid to handle 438,000 megawatts of new load is not measured in billions. It's measured in hundreds of billions. And that money has to come from somewhere. Forcing data centers to pay their own way sounds good. But if it makes Texas more expensive than other states, those companies may simply build elsewhere, leaving Texas with a half-built, fantastically expensive grid and none of the promised economic benefits. If you're just getting your head around how fragile this whole system is, hit the like button. It tells us we're on the right track. And if you have family or friends in Texas, or any place struggling with these issues, share this video with them. This is more than a news report. It's a look under the hood of a system that affects everyone. This fight over who pays is happening because the scale of what's coming is almost incomprehensible. On April 15, 2026, ERCOT filed its long-term load forecast. It is a document that should terrify every Texan. It projects that by the year 2032, just 6 years from now, the total demand on the Texas grid could reach 367,000. The all-time record is about 85,000 megawatts. The state is being asked to quadruple its entire power grid in less than a decade. The sheer amount of construction required is staggering. Thousands of miles of new high-voltage transmission lines, hundreds of new substations, and, most importantly, a generating capacity that doesn't exist today. Building a single large natural gas power plant takes 5 to 7 years, from planning to operation. To meet that 2032 projection, Texas would need to be building dozens of them, right now, simultaneously. It is not happening. There is no master plan to build 275,000 megawatts of new, reliable power generation in 6 years. There isn't enough raw material, there aren't enough skilled workers, and there isn't a clear financial model to pay for it all. What the ERCOT forecast represents is not a plan. It is a mathematical warning. It is the grid operator telling the state, This is the trajectory you are on. If you do not fundamentally change course, you are heading for a cliff. This explosion in demand changes the very nature of the grid itself. Historically, power grids were built to serve human needs, which have a natural daily and seasonal rhythm. The new grid is being built to serve machines. The base load, the minimum amount of power needed 24/7, is skyrocketing. This makes the system more rigid, more brittle. An unexpected failure of a large power plant becomes far more dangerous when the baseline demand is already so high there's no slack left in the system. And even nature itself seems to be turning against the state. A pilot study presented in 2025 by researchers at Texas A&M found another bizarre and dangerous feedback loop. Extreme heat, it turns out, causes Texas trees, particularly oaks, to emit higher levels of a chemical called isoprene. Isoprene is a volatile organic compound that reacts with sunlight and other atmospheric chemicals, like nitrogen oxides from car exhaust, to form ground-level ozone. Ozone is a major component of smog and is severely damaging to human lungs. So, during the worst heat waves, the very trees that should be providing shade and relief are actually contributing to a spike in air pollution, making it even harder for people with asthma or other respiratory conditions to breathe. It is a perfect, vicious circle. The heat makes the air dirtier, and the dirty air makes the heat more dangerous. It is one of a dozen interconnected crises, all escalating at the same time. A heat dome overhead, a power grid straining at its seams, a hidden death toll that is 6 times the official count, a digital gold rush demanding impossible amounts of electricity, a political battle over who will pay for survival, and a future forecast that looks less like a projection and more like an extinction-level event for the grid as we know it. The people on the front lines, like the paramedics at Austin Travis County EMS, are not planning for a single bad summer. They are adapting to a new, permanent reality. Their training, their equipment, their daily protocols are all being rewritten for a world where 105-degree days are the norm, not the exception. They are learning to manage mass casualty incidents where the weapon is the weather. They stock their ambulances with more IV fluids, with ice packs, with cooling blankets. They know the sunset squeeze isn't just a problem for grid operators. It means their busiest hours for heat stroke calls might shift later into the evening. In West Texas, around El Paso, the crisis has another dimension. The city's emergency rooms see a constant flow of patients suffering from heat-related illnesses, many of them migrants who have made a dangerous crossing through the desert. The public health networks there are a complex patchwork of cross-border organizations, local charities, and beleaguered hospitals, all trying to provide care to a transient and vulnerable population with minimal resources. The heat does not recognize borders. This is the state of Texas in the summer of 2026, a place where the Texas Division of Emergency Management, TDEM, is in a state of perpetual activation. One week, they are deploying swiftwater rescue teams for deadly flash floods. The next, they are coordinating the state's response to an oppressive heat dome. It is weather whiplash on a scale that dismantles any notion of a normal season. The emergency is the new normal. Now, I know I've mentioned it before, and I promise not to make a habit of it, but our analytics show that the vast majority of you watching right now, people who are clearly invested in this story, are not subscribed. Think of hitting that subscribe button as your vote. A vote that says these hidden stories matter, that you want us to keep digging. It takes a single click, and it makes all the difference. Please, do it now. The question that hangs over everything is whether any of this is sustainable. The Batch Zero protocol may help ERCOT manage the queue of data centers, but it doesn't create a single new megawatt of power. Governor Abbott's directive may shield ratepayers for a time, but it doesn't change the fundamental physics of the grid. Cooling centers save lives, but they are a symptom of a systemic failure, not a solution. Texas is pursuing a strategy of radical growth, betting its economic future on attracting the world's most power-hungry industries. At the same time, it is trapped on an isolated grid, in a rapidly heating climate, with a set of physical constraints that cannot be wished away. The state is trying to have it all: cheap power, unlimited growth, and a reliable grid. The numbers for summer 2026, and especially the forecast for 2032, suggest that it can no longer have all three. Something has to break. Either the growth stops, or the reliability fails, or the cost of electricity becomes politically and economically unbearable for the average person. There is no fourth option. There is no magic bullet. There is only the brutal mathematics of supply and demand, playing out in real time, with the lives and well-being of 29 million people caught in the balance. The story of Texas in this moment is not ultimately about megawatts or heat domes. It's about choices. It's a high-stakes gamble on whether engineering and political will can outrun physics. And as the temperatures climb,